My name is Piyush Chaudhary, Department of English, Hansraj College. I welcome you all to the ongoing lecture series on readings on Indian diversity and literary movements. Today we'll be doing the unit on Dalit voices and Dalit literature, and in this lecture we'll be reading the poem Habit by FM Shinde. So this particular poem, it's a very poignant poem, a very sensitive poem, which shows how oppressions and discriminations and humiliations were heaped upon the Dalits in such a way that it had become a normal routine habit for them to go through it. This is the title of the poem, Habit. So the poem in short talks about the habitual manner in which Dalits face discrimination, and it also talks about the inability of the Dalits to feel pain and humiliation anymore. The reason for this is that the Dalits have been so used to humiliation and abuse that it has become a normal routine, a part and parcel of their lives. So, therefore, the continuous oppression, the continuous discrimination, the continuous marginalization and victimization now has no effect on the Dalits, and they are under the habit of being abused. So, this is the major understanding and the theme which emerges from the poem. So, what I'll be doing right now is I'll be just reading the poem line by line, and let us now go to the first line of this poem. Look at what FM Shinde says. He says, "Once you are used to it, you never afterwards feel anything. Your blood never more congeals nor flows, for wet mud has been slapped all over your bones." So, if you read the first line, it says that once you are used to it, what is it? What is the meaning of it here? Here, FM Shinde means it is the humiliation, the discrimination, the abuse inflicted on the Dalits. So, here, FM Shinde is saying that once you are used to the humiliations and the routine abuses, then you don't feel anything else. Then your even blood stops flowing as if you are a statue. So here he says that it appears as if mud has been slapped all over your bones. Therefore, this represents a statue. What does the statue represent? A statue represents a state of lifelessness, because a statue cannot feel anything. It is a non-living entity. So therefore, he is describing the image of the Dalit like a clay statue who is lifeless, right? And at the same time, you will also notice that the image is of the blood, a blood not solidifying, a blood not flowing, right? It is congealed, right? So this brings in the idea of death, because the blood stops flowing in the human body only when a person is dead, right? So the stoppage of blood shows death from inside. And also the second symbol, the second image of the wet mud being slapped all over the bone, right? So it refers, the second image is of a clay statue, a statue which is lifeless, a statue which is non-living, a statue which is dead. So therefore Shinde is saying that once a person has been humiliated to the level, the way that which, Dalits are humiliated, they are so habituated to this humiliation that the person feels like a dead statue. There is no life in him, and that person is dead now due to the pains and humiliations, right? Let us now go forward and read the next few lines. It's a very short poem, as we all know. Here, FM Shinde says, "Once you are used to it, even the sorrow that visits you, sometimes in dreams, melts away embarrassed. Habit isn't used to breaking out in feelings." So, in these lines, Shinde is saying that once you are used to the humiliations and the abuses and the pains inflicted by the upper caste, then even the sorrow that comes to you, it goes away. So this is like a complete state of lifelessness that FM Shinde is talking about. It is as if the pain and the humiliation is so overwhelming, it has exceeded to such a level that beyond that level you are not able to feel anything about it. That is why FM Shinde says that the sorrows of their life, even the sorrows, melt away. The sorrow and the pain here is embarrassed. So imagine the sorrow itself is embarrassed. It is as if tragedy itself feels embarrassed by the amount of pain, by the amount of tragedy, by the, that is being inflicted on the Dalits. So therefore, this is a hyperbolic statement about how the pains and the humiliations have exceeded to such levels that the Dalits and the untouchables have now become lifeless. They have now become feelingless, as if they are a walking dead body. So one can see images of death, lifelessness, inertness, right, powerlessness in the untouchables. right? Also, another important thing that Shinde is trying to make here is the idea of sorrow visiting in their dreams. He says that sometimes in dreams they also melt away. So, therefore, Shinde is saying that Dalits feel sorrow even in their dreams, right? Because sorrow is omnipresent. The pains and the humiliations are to such a great extent that even the sorrow goes away embarrassed, and even the dreams, the sorrows, they don't even come in the dreams, right? Looking at the pains of the untouchables in their real life. So even the dreams are like that. So this is the exceeding amount, the overwhelming amount of humiliations and pain, right? So these are some of the major ideas of this particular poem by N.T. Rajkumar. And in this particular poem, we will also notice that we'll try to compare it with N.T. Rajkumar. FM Shinde's poem Habit, we'll try to compare it with the untitled poem by N.T. Rajkumar. Firstly, FM Shinde was a non-Dalit writer. Therefore, as we all know, the idea of Dalit Chetna, we'll come to that. But on the other hand, N.T. Rajkumar is a Dalit writer. Now, this piece of information is important because it brings in the idea of Dalit Chetna. As we all know, Dalit critics like Arjun Dangle, like Sharan Kumar Limbale, like Professor Eleanor Zeliot in the previous essay, they have all talked about how Dalits can only write authentic Dalit literature because they show the pains, the humiliations, and the sense of abuse in a much more realistic and authentic manner. However, the other writers, who are themselves not Dalits, may not be able to explain the humiliations and the chetna of being a Dalit because they have been non Dalits. Therefore, they can only sympathize, but they can never show the reality. Alongside FM Shinde, we can also place Munshi Premchand. Both Shinde and Premchand, I am very sure, are against the idea of caste and they believe in an equal society as per the ideals set out by B.R. Ambedkar. But the way that they write Dalit literature is very different from the way a Dalit would write Dalit literature, isn't it? Traditional Dalit critics might not be very happy reading this poem by FM Shinde. Why? Because they believe that the untouchable here is shown as a lifeless person on whom pains and tribulations are just being inflicted and they are not doing anything. For example, I'll give you proof for this. Shinde says that your blood does not flow. So, in a very, very subtle manner, he's mocking at the untouchables and showing their lack of mobilization and the lack of blood and the lack of power in their blood, in their veins. Though we as students of literature totally understand that FM Shinde is not discriminating against the Dalits, he is not directly mocking the Dalits. But in a way, we will all agree after reading this poem that he shows the Dalits in a slightly inert, or you can say in a passive light, as if they are not doing anything, as if they have accepted their lives, as if they are just allowing the pain to be inflicted on them, but they are not doing anything to prevent themselves from their humiliation, right? The point is that the entire system is so much pitted against them that they are not able to do it because they are helpless, in the sense that all the institutions of society are they are caste generated, and they run under the aegis of caste because the upper castes control everything, all the institutions of society. It's not that the Dalits are inert. So therefore, this poem becomes a highly reductive reading of the poem by FM Shinde, and the reason for this reductiveness is the lack of Dalit Chetna or Dalit consciousness. FM Shinde was never a Dalit and he never understood the reality, the pains and the humiliations and the everyday assaults and the extreme amount of abuse and humiliations. Therefore, he is looking through a glass, you can say. You can say that non-Dalits, basically, they look from a glass mirror. They look from a glass screen and they do not understand the reality in a close manner. They look from a distance. So the idea of perspective also is very important in Dalit Chetna. When we compare a Dalit writer writing a poem or any piece of literature versus a non-Dalit writer writing a poem or any piece of literature. This is exactly the case with Premchand, who was an upholder of dharma, righteousness. He was a great crusader of social realism. He used literature to bring about a social change. But the way that he wrote some of his short stories related to untouchables shows the untouchables in a very helpless light. For example, Deliverance by Premchand, in my previous lecture on GE Readings on Indian Diversity, I have discussed that. You can take a look at that. But then let's go forward now. After FM Shinde, when we'll come to N.T. Rajkumar, I'll take a separate lecture. We will tend to compare the two poems. The current G that we are all studying, it has two poems, FM Shinde, Habit, and N.T. Rajkumar's Untitled Poem. And in that second poem, Rajkumar is angry. He's willing to strike back at the enemy who has oppressed him since a generation. There is a strong desire in him to strike back at the enemy. Who is the enemy? The upper castes are the enemies who have been discriminating and inflicting pain on the untouchables for being lower castes. So there is a marked sense of retaliation, rebellion. There's a sense, this force is there because it's very visible from this poem, uh, untitled poem by N.T. Rajkumar. The untouchables, the lower castes, they are shown in a very different manner, right? But when it comes to the poem by FM Shinde, they are represented as a lifeless statue where blood is not flowing, and even the sorrow comes and goes away. So one can see images of inertness, powerlessness, death, lifelessness in the untouchables, and this is something that traditional Dalit critics will not like, right? In the poem by FM Shinde, the poet is in a very subtle way blaming the Dalits for their lack of action in a very very subtle way, right? So therefore, this is a very reductive reading because it appears as if the Dalits are being blamed for their situation, right? So one, hence therefore, you can conclude that under such circumstances, Professor Eleanor Zeliot was right in the previous lecture which I discussed, that the authenticity of Dalit literature can only be judged if there is Dalit Chetna, and only Dalit writer who has gone through the feelings of untouchability, only that writer will be able to write authentic Dalit literature. Well, it is actually also true that such a poem like Habit by Shinde is, reductive and will only generate a feeling of what you can say pathos. It will not make us think critically. And also, this gives less amount of representation to the individuality of the Dalits, because the Dalits is simply shown as a lifeless statue. So there is no amount of individuality, no representation given to him. This is wrong. But nonetheless, in totality, the poem is a wonderfully written poem, a wonderfully crafted poem. It uses certain images to show how the pains are an everyday affair for the untouchables. But we also need to think critically as per the idea given by Professor Eleanor Zeliot, Arjun Dangle, Sharan Kumar Limbale, so on and so forth. So this brings us to the end of this lecture by Professor Zeliot, and I will end this lecture now. Thank you so much for your attention. Please share the video. Please feel free to comment your views and suggestions below. I will see you in the next lecture on the Untitled Poem by N.T. Rajkumar. It's a beautiful poem. It's a very strong poem and carries a lot of grit, strength, and it'll be good. And it'll be the next lecture, and I'll see you there. Thank you. Goodbye. Jai Hind.